Hello, Connecticut, and welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. The title basically says it all. I'm Nancy Barrow, and I will be delving into this new state program and how it can help you and your family. This podcast will give you information you should know about Connecticut paid leave and maybe just a little bit more. Connecticut paid leave brings peace of mind to your home, family, and workplace. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. Today, we're talking about paid leave on the national level. And I've said this before on other podcast episodes, but out of 193 countries in the United Nations, only a small handful do not have paid parental leave laws. Papua New Guinea, Suriname, a few South Pacific island nations like Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, Nauru, Palau, and Tonga, and of course, the United States of America. Which sounds very strange to say. And joining me in the National Paid Leave conversation is Connecticut Paid Leave Board member and chair of the Outreach and Engagement Committee, Molly Weston Williamson, who graduated from Yale Law School, was the director of paid leave and future of work at A Better Balance, where she led the advocacy around paid leave laws across the country. And she directed A Better Balance's efforts to address the needs of all workers in a changing workforce. She was also a senior staff attorney, and she is currently a senior fellow with the Center for American Progress and is a nationally recognized expert on paid leave policy. Also joining me is Cassandra Gomez, a senior staff attorney at A Better Balance, and she got her law degree from Northeastern University. Molly and Cassandra, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Well, let's just get a little background. Molly, can you tell me what your job is as a senior fellow for the Center for American Better Balance?
So as a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, my focus is 100% on paid leave. So I am working with state coalitions across the country in states like Connecticut just a few years back that are working to pass paid family and medical leave laws and also to implement them to make sure they really work for folks. I'm also working, as we're going to talk more about today, at the national level. So working with federal coalition members on how do we craft and pass really strong paid leave policies that are really going to deliver for workers, for families, for employers across the country. And we're continuing, I think, as a movement to work at both the state and federal level to deliver as much as we can for the folks who really need it. Using all of the tools that are available to us.
Wonderful. So Cassandra, as senior staff attorney, you are still carrying the torch for national paid leave.
Yes. So I am on our paid leave team, A Better Balance. So just in general, our organization is a national legal and policy nonprofit. We have offices all around the country, and we work on lots of issues like paid family and medical leave, paid sick leave, and we also do Pregnant Workers Fairness Act work. So we have a broad scope of issues that really just support workers and their families. We also operate a free legal helpline throughout the U.S. That really helps workers understand what their workplace rights are. But so I'm on our paid leave team. So I do paid sick leave work all around the country at the local, state, and federal level, and I do paid family and medical leave work pertinent to this conversation. So also at the state and federal levels throughout the country.
And I know caregivers getting support is really big at A Better Balance as well. And they're fighting for American workers to get time and flexibility. That's really what we're fighting for, right? When they need to take care of their families or themselves.
Absolutely.
Before we get into the national angle, Molly, what is it about Connecticut paid leave that inspires you to be on the board?
So I think Connecticut is really exciting in the ways in which the state has really taken the lead on ensuring that all Connecticut workers know about and can use their rights. I think Connecticut has really done some groundbreaking work in terms of exactly that. My passion as it goes to my board role is that outreach and education. I think Connecticut has done incredible stuff from showing up at, I think, every sports game that's played in Connecticut at this point to really interesting social media campaigns in English and Spanish to this podcast. I really do think that Connecticut is trying every possible angle, using every tool at their disposal to really make sure that folks know about and can use their rights, especially in a program like Connecticut's, which is 100% paid for by workers.
Yeah.
I will say that that's been a challenge throughout the country, that over and over again, when we look at why are the rates of usage not as high as we'd like to see them? One huge barrier, especially for lower income workers and workers of color, is simply knowing about the program. And I think Connecticut's doing really incredible work to make sure that every worker knows this program is there for them when they need it, and so can access those tools when they need them.
Well, let's talk about the roots of the national paid leave movement. Where did the national discussions come from, and how long have they been going on?
The fight for paid leave in this country is a lot longer than we sometimes think about it. In 1917, 15 different states introduced model legislation to try and create what was then called cash sickness benefits, money in your pocket for when you can't work, what today we might call medical leave. And that turned into what's now been an over a century long fight at both the state and federal level. These kind of benefits were actively debated in sort of the first round of creating the American Social Safety Net. It was a big part of the discussion in the 1935 Social Security Act. And really has sort of been, it's ebbed and flowed and been in and out of the conversation, but hasn't really let up since. We saw pioneering states create the first temporary disability benefits in the 1940s. We saw states continue to build on that for decades. And then we had a couple of big breakthroughs along the way. In 1993, the federal government passed the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act, the FMLA, which will celebrate its 30th birthday in February, so not too long. The FMLA is a groundbreaking law that's benefited hundreds of millions of workers over the last several decades. But critically, the FMLA is unpaid.
Right. I think that's what a lot of people get confused about FMLA and paid family and medical leave authority. Like they get very confused by it. And I always say, well, FMLA gives you your job back. It guarantees a job like yours or your job when you leave. But paid is that we are giving you the income replacement.
Absolutely. I think, when we talk about the need for paid leave, we need for workers to have both paid and leave. You need both the cash in your pocket to keep paying your bills, which is what the authority provides you, and the leave, the right to take the time you need and then come back to your job. Because if you don't have that, ultimately, you don't really have leave, you have severance pay.
What are the barriers to paid leave passing right now? Is it simply bipartisanship or is it a deeper issue? What do you guys think about that?
I think one of the biggest problems that we see as far as getting paid family and medical leave over the finish line is really just a misunderstanding of what exactly paid family and medical leave is. I think that there are lots of myths to dispel about paid family and medical leave. When you actually have a conversation with someone about how, we're talking about, usually a social insurance program, we're talking about programs that, cover serious illnesses, allow workers to take time off, to care for their seriously ill family members when they're seriously ill, to bond with a new child, things like that. When we take a look and point to, okay, well, here's how these programs have played out in the States. This has benefited businesses. This has benefited workers. When we actually break down what the concerns are, I think that's those are helpful conversations to have.
I think that's absolutely right. And I would add to that paid family and medical leave is not a partisan issue anywhere except in the halls of legislatures. When you poll actual voters, paid leave is overwhelmingly, preposterously popular, including with Republicans, including with Democrats, including with independents.
I think it's 84% support rate across the country for this.
These are crazy off the charts numbers. So I think when you actually talk to workers, to families, to voters, people aren't thinking in partisan terms. And I think it only becomes a partisan issue in very particular legislative contexts. And I think that's something that a lot of folks are working very hard to overcome. For example, earlier this year when Delaware passed paid leave, they did so on a bipartisan basis. And I think there's been tremendous efforts there, but I do think a lot of those myths, a lot of opposition that claims to speak on behalf of business, but often doesn't really necessarily speak on behalf of real small business owners.
Yeah.
Who will tell you over and over again why they need paid leave as a tool. And I do think really, getting an understanding of what we're talking about. I think there's a sense, if you ever read the comments on any article on paid leave, which you should not, you'll hear a lot of folks saying things like, why should I pay for other people's kids? Leaving aside that we live in a society and that's how everything works, that we all take care of one another. What we know is that most folks who need paid leave need it for their own serious health needs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's truly universal. I think that we know that not everyone is going to have kids or has, maybe done with having kids, but we know that's not what most folks are using it for. Any one of us could get cancer. Any one of us could get into a car accident. All of us are going to have a need at some point in our lives. And I think the more we all understand that we're talking about something that's truly universal, the more we'll understand that it's a universal need that deserves a universal solution.
Yeah. Maybe I should be asking what went wrong and why didn't the National Paid Family and Medical Leave pass?
So I would describe it as we haven't succeeded yet. Almost exactly a year ago, actually, we're off by about a week. And the House of Representatives passed a comprehensive, permanent paid family and medical leave program for the first time in American history. We've never been to that place. And then, unfortunately, that not just the paid leave components, but the package as a whole couldn't get over the finish line in the Senate. And that was for a bunch of factors that I think went beyond just conversations about paid leave. And ultimately, Congress was able to come up with the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes a lot of really strong and valuable provisions. But I think we all know that a lot got lost. When you're trying to do things that are revolutionary, sometimes it takes some extra bites at the apple. And I think not only the paid leave components, but also the childcare components, huge portions of other groundbreaking provisions came effectively within one vote of becoming federal legislation. And that's heartbreaking, but it's also, I think, a call to action. It's a call to, it's time to complete that unfinished business, which I think everyone is very committed to. Both from the advocacy side and I think from the policymaker side.
What is your strategy now and how do you move forward with getting paid leave passed now? How do you figure out and make your strategy so it may pass this year?
So I think really at this point, the strategy is to keep beating the drum. The strategy is to keep talking about what it is that workers really need, to keep lifting up the voices of workers and experiences of workers. I think the strategy is to keep talking about all of the ways in which paid leave responds to really urgent needs, not only for families, but for our economy. And the ways in which, I think we often talk about paid leave in relation to COVID, which really, I think, dramatized a lot of the needs and I think made it sort of front of mind for a lot of us. But COVID didn't create the need for paid leave, right? Like workers needed paid leave yesterday. They need it today. They'll need it tomorrow. And I think collectively, we're committed to continuing the fight until all workers have what they need, looking at all of the options that are available to us at the federal, and I'll stress again, at the state level, where I think states like Connecticut have been leading the way forever, not only in sort of showing the feds how to do it and leading by example, but also in delivering real benefits for real workers.
Yeah, it's over $190 million so far that we paid out.
Connecticut paid leave is not a symbol. It's not an example. It's real money in real workers' pockets right now. I had my second son last year, and I was able to receive benefits through New York's paid family leave law. And if I had to wait until we passed something federally, I don't know how old he'd be by the time we got there. And so I think really thinking about what are all of the tools available to us to not only sort of keep up the fight and keep up the conversation, but how can we deliver as much as possible for the people who need it as soon as possible?
That's all exactly right. And just harking back to what Molly said about how the FMLA was enacted in 1993, the FMLA is turning 30. I, like the FMLA, I was born in 1993. So I am, at the same age as the FMLA. So just conceptualizing the fact that this, even just within the span of the last few decades, like this fight, children who were born under the FMLA regime are now in this fight for paid family medical leave at the federal level still. It is my hope that we can continue to build on the momentum from last year. And that we've been seeing in the States for decades now, and make sure that I am the last generation that has to fight for this this critical, needed the law that, as Molly said, workers need this now. So, and that will continue to be the case. And I don't think, from what we're seeing, the states are not waiting. States are really understanding and hearing workers. Even in states with existing paid family and medical leave programs, we've seen them continue to build upon them and expand them. California just expanded their law. Washington State has also expanded their program. New York has expanded their program during the pandemic, and we're continuing to advocate for better improvements. So we're not waiting for the state for the federal government. The states are acting, but the federal government is a very important piece to the puzzle that we will continue to work on.
It's strange when you look across the world, the globe, and we're the only leading nation that doesn't have this. It's almost a philosophical issue, maybe. Have you done any research about, is it more of a philosophical problem with the United States? Is it a boundary?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of comparative research out there that has really, tried to understand why exactly this hasn't happened in the U.S. I think that, it is sort of a philosophical, also cultural issue. I was actually in Europe this summer, and I spoke to a German woman who was born and raised in Germany, has worked in Germany her whole life. And, she couldn't even really conceptualize or grasp the need for my job to exist. Why is this a fight? Why do we need to advocate for workers to be able to take leave when they are sick or when their families are sick? I think it's, sort of a number of things that work together to get us to where we are. But I do think that that's rapidly shifting because, especially in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, as Molly said, COVID didn't start this need. But I think workers now more than ever really understand that they need to be able to care for themselves and their families. And I don't see the momentum that has built up really going away or dissipating at all.
Yeah, I do think a lot of people now know about paid leave and that it's a national issue.
Another thing that I think COVID did is a surprising number of people don't realize that they don't have the right to paid leave until they need it.
Exactly.
I think you hear over and over again from folks who either didn't think about it or took it for granted. And then when the moment hit for them and their family, their country didn't have their back. Their country wasn't there for them in the way that they needed them to be. And that changed their understanding of the world. And I think really thinking about, what would a world look like? What would a country look like in which nobody went broke because they got sick? And nobody went broke because their mom had a stroke, and nobody went broke because they had a baby. And everybody had both the legal rights to time off from their job and the cash they needed to keep paying their bills to be able to take the time they truly needed for themselves and their family. That's a fundamentally different country.
I feel like the way you just summed that up, that's it. I can't imagine a country that doesn't care about its citizens and their well-being. And we keep talking about COVID, how it showed how important paid leave and family and medical leave is for families and caregivers. And 17% of women leave their job after childbirth. But women who are allowed paid family leave during this time only have a 2.6 percentage of quitting, which I think is huge, that women don't have to quit their job to have a baby.
There was, I think, McSweeney's or somebody like that had an article a couple of years ago about how the United States offers really robust permanent unpaid leave to new moms. And I think, we all feel that every day, that it's a truism, but I think there really is a failure to plan is a planning to fail element here, that when we pretend that health and care and family and children are somebody else's responsibility or a personal problem, we set up a system that's going to leave workers, especially women of color, especially lower income workers, set up to fail. I think we've all thrown around the quote over and over again that other countries have social safety nets. The U.S. has women. And that's what happened with COVID. The system failed when the daycares closed and the schools went remote and somebody had to stay home to take care of the kids. What happened is women stayed home because they had to, and we lost the women's labor force participation gains of my entire lifetime. And we're starting to see some of that recovering. But we know that an awful lot of people are never going to get back the kind of economic progress that they're going to be there, especially for women of color. And we know that if we don't learn from, as we saw, that the lack of a national paid leave policy hindered our pandemic response at the time. And we know that folks who were in states that had paid leave programs already in place did better. Yeah. They had more tools available to them. They had more resources to do what they needed to do to take care of themselves and their families. And I think we would be completely remiss if we looked at the last 2 years and didn't take the lessons about how we build a stronger, fairer, more resilient economy that invests in women and people of color and immigrants and low-income workers, because without it, we're all going to lose.
Yeah, there needs to be equity, right, across the board when it comes to health.
While we're speaking about equity, as Molly said, women are more likely to be primary caregivers for their families. Women of color in particular are especially likely to be the key breadwinners for their families. 79% of Black women are the key breadwinners in their families, and 49% of Latinx women are. That is astounding, especially when you consider that only 32.8% of Black workers and just 22.9% of Latinx workers have access to paid family and medical leave. So that means that somewhere along the line, workers have to make a decision about how they're going to handle a caregiving need or a need that comes up when they get seriously ill. And, whether they choose to remove themselves from the workforce or whether they choose to forego the leave, somewhere along the line, their needs are not being met. And that is absolutely horrendous in one of the richest countries in the world.
Do you think that the federal government will leave it up to individual states? And if we get a national program, how would it work with the already existing paid leave programs in the state? Would it be in addition to, in lieu of?
So what was in Build Back Better was a really strong structure for saying, okay, we know that there are states like Connecticut that already have strong programs that are already benefiting workers. And then also, especially given some of the choices that had to be made to get Build Back Better through the House, frankly, state programs that were more generous, that were stronger, that were offering more. The vision there was states that have existing programs can keep operating those programs. And if those states meet some basic requirements to show that their program is at least as strong as the federal program and meet some data sharing requirements, essentially the state programs get to act as the federal program in their state. And that means that if you're a Connecticut worker, if Connecticut pursued what we call a legacy state status, instead of having to say, oh, I apply to the feds over here for this money and I apply to the state over here for this money, you put in one application in one place, you get all of your benefits. And then the kicker at the end of all of this is if you meet those requirements as a state, the feds cut the state a giant check to cover the cost of what otherwise would have been being paid to Connecticut workers directly through the federal program. So I think of it as it's sort of like the Ruth's Chris Steakhouse of policy. It's Connecticut's federal paid leave program. So you get to go one place because we know it's already confusing. It's confusing right now. And if we add on a robust federal program, I think that's an opportunity to actively confront those complexities and to work thoughtfully to say, knowing everything we know from 30 years of FMLA, from decades of state paid leave programs, from state FMLAs, how do we start from the beginning to build a system that's thoughtful and understandable and navigable? And really, I think as a sort of principal perspective, like how do we ensure that there's no wrong door?
Yeah. And business is really important. 90% of businesses say that paid family leave improves productivity, and 99% said it improves employee morale, which is not I mean, we all know that, right? But isn't there a small business majority, like a coalition nationally of small businesses that are in favor of national paid leave?
Yeah, there's been really incredible work done by groups like Small Business Majority, like Main Street Alliance, that have really built up this coalition of small businesses really speaking for what they need. Because I think the thing we often forget about is that in the status quo, so in a world in which there's no guaranteed government program and employers are all kind of on their own, if you're Amazon or Google or Facebook, you're some gigantic multi-zillion dollar company, you can afford to pay whatever you want in benefits to attract the best workers. But if you're a small startup, if you're a mom and pop shop, if you're trying to compete in this economy for the best folks, you're never going to have the same resources that those folks have. And so policy is putting you at a disadvantage if it isn't standing up for and investing in small businesses by giving them the tools to provide the benefits that they want to provide to be competitive in the marketplace. But I think even beyond that, small business owners care about their employees.
Yeah, right. It's like family.
It's not employee number 17 in the factory, wherever. It's Mary, whose mom is sick, and you were at the potluck. And small business owners want to be able to deliver for and care for the people that they care about. And if we don't invest in the policy that gives them the tools to do so, we are as a country failing small business. And that's why it's so exciting that states like Connecticut have stepped up to invest in and support small businesses by giving them the tools they need to deliver for their workers in the way they want to compete for the best workers, and really to support entrepreneurship.
But nationally, with that kind of support, 84% of people are buying into the national program. We have all this business, like the small business majority. There's so much support. How can we translate all of that momentum into a win for us?
I think it's a continuation of amplifying the voices that really show what could be accomplished with the federal paid family and medical leave program. Mm-hmm. It is helpful that we have the states to turn to because, there have been a number of studies that have shown that even through the pandemic, support for paid family and medical leave has increased amongst small businesses. So I think just being able to amplify those voices more and center them, and ensure that the big guys aren't taking over the conversation. Small businesses benefit when costs are aggregated through a program like a state program or like we would have at the national level.
I believe there's 11 states and the District of Columbia who have paid leave. So it's California, Washington, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Mass, Rhode Island, Maryland and Delaware, and Oregon and Colorado and the District of Columbia. So have other states contacted you, or do you know if other states are interested in doing paid leave besides these 11 who are so brilliant?
There are definitely states that are actively working on this right now. New Mexico just finished up work on a task force to study what a paid family and medical leave program might look like in their state. So that's definitely one to watch. In Maine, there's currently a paid family and medical leave commission that's working on a legislative approach. There's also a paid family and medical leave ballot initiative that has been filed. So lots of momentum in those states. And then I think just in general, following the passage of Build Back Better in the House and seeing that there's not currently a federal program that's on the way immediately. There have been lots of other states that are really starting to explore what a paid family and medical leave program might look like. So that can look like studies, that can look like a coalition forming, getting conversations going. I think there was great coverage in Michigan where paid family and medical leave really became sort of an election issue. So this is really on the forefront of a lot of voters' minds and legislators' minds as a result.
I would add Minnesota to that list of states that I think are really well positioned for next legislative session. But really, at this point, it's easier to list states where there isn't a strong effort to try and move things forward on paid leave, again, sort of in whatever way seems viable in that state. So, for example, in South Carolina, they passed a really robust paid parental leave program for state employees. Georgia did paid parental leave for state employees, including school teachers. In Ohio, there's really great municipal paid leave efforts. So I think, this is not a red or blue issue. This is not a coastal versus middle of the country issue. Absolutely everywhere, folks are working really, really hard to ensure that their friends and neighbors and families and loved ones have what they need. And I think it's really just a question of what's the strategy that different folks are taking in different places. And again, I truly believe that guaranteeing paid leave for all Americans is a question of when, not if. And we'll build whatever way we need to build to get there.
Yeah, and I personally, I lean towards optimism, but I was also really excited by, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA, which was the first paid leave law that we had in the U.S. It was temporary. It was, very short-lived. It was passed at the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020. The right to paid leave expired in December 2020, so it is no longer in effect. However, that was the first measure that we've seen that gave workers throughout the country who were covered by the law a right to some paid time off. So that was a great step in the right direction. There were attempts at getting some paid vaccination time enacted through regulations that didn't ultimately come to fruition, but there have been that's all to say that our advocacy efforts have been working. We are headed in the right direction. And if you're ever confused, you can definitely give a Better Balances hotline a call. It is 1-833 need ABB. So 1-833-633-3222.
Perfect.
And we can answer any workplace rights questions.
That's great.
In English and Spanish.
Molly Weston Williamson and Cassandra Gomez, thank you so much for being here and lending your expertise. And you guys are amazing, smart, and dedicated women. So thank you so much for what you do for all families and women everywhere.
Thank you, Connecticut.
Thank you for getting the word out on this podcast.
And for more information on Connecticut paid leave or to apply for benefits, go to ctpaidleave.org. This has been another edition of the Paid Leave Podcast. Please like and subscribe so you'll be notified about new podcasts that become available. Connecticut Paid Leave is a public act with a personal purpose. I'm Nancy Barrow, and thanks for listening.